Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Anna Santamaria. I use she, her pronouns. I am Family Equality's Director of Archive, Storytelling, and Brand. And my work is really centered around protecting, preserving, and making accessible the history of LGBTQ plus families. So that's where you all come in. And I will be facilitating today's discussion. So you're going to hear a lot of my voice. Sorry in advance. Today, we're talking about a case that is headed to the highest court in the nation, and I'm so lucky to be joined by a team of panelists that can help us make sense of what's going on, what's at stake, and then how LGBTQ plus families, allies, grandparents, you name it, can help shape what happens next. This fall, the Supreme Court will be hearing oral arguments for St. Mary Catholic Parish v. Roy. This is a case about whether a Catholic preschool can receive public funding through Colorado's universal preschool program while refusing to comply with its requirements to admit all children, including LGBTQ plus kids and children with LGBTQ plus parents. So to tackle our questions about this and more, you don't want to hear from me. I am not a lawyer. I am joined by a special panel of expert speakers. First up, we have Meg York, who is the Chief Legal and Policy Officer for COLAGE, the only national organization dedicated to connecting and supporting people with LGBTQ plus parents and caregivers. She leads all their work on parentage protections, access to LGBTQ plus family building, marriage equality, and inclusive schools. So she doesn't have a lot of work to do at all. We are also joined by Marty Moore, who's the CEO of Rocky Mountain Equality. And for 30 years, she's been on the front lines of elevating the rights, visibility, safety, and socioeconomic status of the LGBTQ plus community at both the local level and the national level. In her current role as CEO, she oversees Rocky Mountain Equality, a Colorado-based not-for-profit organization that facilitates connection, advocacy, education, resources, research, and programs to ensure LGBTQ plus people and communities thrive in Boulder County and beyond. And then last but certainly not least, we have Nikhil Vashi, our Senior Director of Educational Law and Policy for Family Equality. In this role, they promote policy solutions at the local, state, and federal levels to ensure LGBTQ plus families have access to quality education in a supportive environment. They also oversee litigation, amicus briefs, and other legal efforts to combat discrimination against LGBTQ plus families in education. So these are the people you want to hear from when it comes to this case, and that means I'm going to stop talking soon. Welcome to all the panelists. Thank you so much for being here. And like I said, for everyone watching, there will be a time at the end of this discussion to ask questions, but feel free to start popping them in now, and we can just get them queued up. In the meantime, let's begin this briefing by hearing from Marty, who will provide a little bit of background and context for this case.
Anna, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Marty Moore. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm sitting in lovely Boulder, Colorado. If you think about Colorado, or if you live in Colorado, I guess I should say, you know that something's afoot here. From 303 Creative to Masterpiece Cake Shop to the Childs case, and now St. Mary's v. Roy, they're all based out of Colorado and seem to be based around Colorado Springs. As a long time, I was born in Colorado. I was gone for a long time because I figured out I was a lesbian and I didn't fit. But I came back to Colorado about 13 years ago after Seattle and New York City. And when I came back to Colorado, they're like, why are you back in Colorado? And I said, because I want to make Colorado a state where a kid like me doesn't have to leave to feel at home. So as we think about the St. Mary's v. Roy case, coming out of the state of Colorado, I think there's a lot of work to do. The current case is attacking Colorado's universal preschool program, as Anna has already said. In Colorado, that was a landmark investment for us. Our current governor, soon to be out, Jared Polis, used a lot of his political chits to get that up and rolling. It didn't start smoothly or easily. I think part of that is because of the They were dealing with public, private schools, secular schools, and religious schools, trying to get all the systems working right. And the need, like everybody was applying all at once, the system kept crashing, but it finally got up and it got rolling. But it was a big commitment. This case would throw that aside. Um, if we lose this, their aim is to get to like change the whole system. They want to spend taxpayer dollars to fund institutions, religious institutions in particular, that turn children away because of who they are or who their parents are. And we have to be clear that taxpayer money should never fund discrimination. Early childhood, we all know. I still have stories. As I was thinking going into this, I remember being bullied, not because I was a lesbian, because I had skinny little legs standing in the bathroom in second grade. Like, here I am, a 64-year-old lesbian, like, oh, I remember that moment, right? And so, in thinking about the stigma that get placed on kids and that you internalize as a parent, like, we're continuing that. And I think all of our work is to make sure that everybody belongs everywhere we go. And we've made a lot of steps forward, and now we're starting to regress with some of these recent Supreme Court rulings. The lesson in all of this is that they're trying to teach is that we all don't belong. We know we belong. As a lesbian, my ex and I have now 2 adult kids, but living in Seattle, we went to Catholic schools. Like Ellen renewed her love of the Pope because the public schools weren't doing what we needed to do. And I can tell you, the Catholic schools forms were better. They could take 2 parents. They treated us both as equals. Our kids were loved and taught and appreciated. So we know Catholics can do it right, but we seem again to be moving backward. Public funding requires public responsibility. And that basic contract cannot be selectively applied. These families right now are fighting to ensure that our commitment in Colorado to every child is more than words, that no child is left out of universal pre-K programs that was designed to serve all kids, which is why we've got secular, religious, public, and private schools. They like brought everybody in. This all started in my memory in 2022. The Archdiocese of Denver directed school administrators to not enroll or re-enroll transgender or gender nonconforming students. They went on to say that same-sex parents should be treated differently than heterosexual parents. But they could stay as long as they remained faithful to the church, but only one parent would be recognized. Then on my birthday and Madonna's, August 16th, 2023, they began this legal process that has led to why we're having this conversation now. We've been here before. Behind me on my screen, you can see the great name Jean Dabowski. In 1992, in the state of Colorado, voters passed a ballot measure that would have removed rights for gays and lesbians. It was argued in front of the Supreme Court in a case called Romer versus Evans. We won that. I believe it's the founding of the win for Obergefell v. Hodges, and has been the base, and the lawyers are on here can correct me, but we have them muted. So we'll keep them muted and they can correct me later. But some of the other big wins that we've had for LGBT rights stand on Jean Dabowski, a tremendous ally and someone who's still on some of our working committees. These loud, hateful voices that started in the 90s, possibly in the 80s, but the 90s was their first case, are coming out of Colorado Springs, where Focus on Family and other like religious organizations are based. In the state of Colorado, in addition to St. Mary's v. Roy, we have 2 anti-trans ballot measures that we will be voting on in November. One would remove trans kids from sports, from little kids to collegiate. The other will remove gender affirming care. They're saying it's surgery, but we know how they work, from below 18 years of age. So we're fighting a lot of battles in Colorado. One of the things that I think is important is sharing stories. So I've shared this story about a great experience I had in the Catholic Church that seemed to work by the tenets of Jesus Christ. It was an amazing experience. Everybody's welcome. One other story that I'll share about how kids are impacted by these hateful rulings is when in the state of Colorado or state of California, when Gavin Newsom started issuing same-sex marriage licenses in San Francisco area. My daughter, who was 11, our daughter, who was 11 at the time, said, "Would you please get married so I can be like the other kids?" We did. But that's the country we want to live in, where everybody has the same rights, the same responsibilities, the same ability to thrive, and the same acceptance of a family unit. So again, they've been trying this for more than 30 years. They continue knocking on the door. As an aside, I will say that I recently spoke with the team of lawyers at the Colorado Attorney General's office, and they're working hard on this case. We've had an election. Our Attorney General current is Phil Weiser. He's in the race to become our next governor because he's term limited. But these lawyers said they would stay with the case, as offices change, they will stay through the ruling. And so it's a great team, a committed team, and I'm hopeful, because if we don't have hope, what do we have? So on that, I'll turn it back to you, Anna.
Well, what a great ending to that. I do appreciate the acknowledgement that, we've been here for a long time as the archivist. I'm like, yeah, we've been here for a while and we know how to navigate these waters. So thank you so much. And thanks for sharing your stories. I'm a fellow Catholic school kid, so we're all bonded by these experiences. Now I'd love to turn things over to Meg and Nikhil to give us some of that legal talk we're talking about. Take it away.
Yes, I mean, thank you, Marty. I don't know how I follow Marty, but um, thanks for having me here. As we mentioned, my name's Meg York. I use she/her pronouns, and I'm here on behalf of COLAGE, the only national organization dedicated to supporting people with LGBTQ parents. I am currently at a conference, so I'm in a funny little corner of the conference room. So forgive my lighting or if there are some noise intrusions. But I'm really glad to be here today with Nikhil and with Marty, Family Equality and Rocky Mountain Equality, because this case touches the people and the families that all of our organizations serve, right? Kids with LGBTQ parents and LGBTQ families more broadly. And when it comes to kids, it's really simple. Echoing Marty, who perhaps said it best, right? Programs funded by taxpayers should be open to everyone. No child should be excluded. Why is that? Because exclusion sends a message about whose families count or which families are less deserving of dignity. Are we really wanting to tell 4-year-olds that there's something wrong with them simply because of who their parents are or who they are? We also know that welcoming school environments are really foundational to healthy development, right? It's where many kids first engage with communities beyond their immediate families, and it might be their first experience or external experience of belonging. Colorado created a universal pre-K program so that all children in the state could access it. But now the Supreme Court is tasked with determining whether all children will include kids with LGBTQ parents. It's
Yeah,
just,
absolutely right, Peg. And like you mentioned, while kids are at the center of this case, this is discrimination against LGBTQ plus families, against the entire family. So when a child is turned away because of who their parents are, that sort of tells the whole family that they don't belong. And for some LGBTQ plus families, that's that's a particularly painful harm because they are people of faith. Surprise, surprise. There's Catholic LGBTQ plus people. There's LGBTQ plus people in every major faith. And, these might be longtime church members, people who were baptized, confirmed, had a Catholic education themselves. And so for them, this is not just, losing access to a preschool. It's one important cultural, spiritual touchstone of their life that's being yanked away. Um, Not only that, but if participating providers in this program can deny people based on their LGBTQ plus status, some families might not have a meaningful alternative for preschool whatsoever. I mean, In a lot of places, there's only one or two preschool options as it is. And if they can deny them, then this family's access, like you said before, that's supposed to be for all children and all families. It's now suddenly dependent on where you live in the state, rather than, you being just, somebody who rightfully deserves this. And lastly, I also just wanted to touch on the harm to LGBTQ plus children. Even children who are not able to name their own identity yet, they're affected by these messages. Like, I was a non-binary 4-year-old once, and I didn't even know that word. I didn't know that word until my late 20s. But the messages that I saw, like you said, Meg, told me that there was something wrong with me, and that has affected me, and that's gonna affect a lot of preschool age students just witnessing that. So, very clear that, kids with LGBTQ plus parents, LGBTQ plus families, and even LGBTQ plus kids are impacted here. And, we've heard a bit about how this case came up to the court. I think Marty summarized that really well. But Meg, could you maybe dive a little bit deeper into like the legal nerdy stuff? What is the court deciding here?
Yes, I mean, I'm always happy to dive into some legal nerdy stuff. But I want to I want to zoom out a little bit because I don't know what folks' backgrounds are on this call, and so I want to at first just kind of talk about how a case really gets to before the Supreme Court or what happens right in the beginning, right? So when a case goes to the Supreme Court, you have the petitioners and the respondents. The petitioners, which here it's St. Mary, St. Bernadette, some parents, and the Archdiocese of Denver were the ones who petitioned or asked the court. So they're the ones asking the court to revisit or reconsider a lower court's decision. And the respondents, and here are that's Lisa Roy, Don Odine in their official capacities on behalf of Colorado. That's where we get the name Roy. If you're wondering, where's Roy? Who's Roy? Right? So, in their official capacities, the respondents, they're the ones saying, nope, lower court got it right. So for the sake of simplicity, as we move forward here, I'll refer to the petitioners as St. Mary and the respondents as Colorado. But I just wanted to kind of clear that up and where the names come from. So, generally speaking, St. Mary is arguing that it is being forced to opt out of Colorado's universal preschool program and claiming that Colorado is engaging in a form of religious discrimination in violation of the First Amendment because Colorado will not provide the school with an exemption from rules that require equal opportunities in preschool admissions. So specifically, St. Mary is seeking an exemption so that they can continue taking taxpayer dollars while denying admission to LGBTQ children and children with LGBTQ parents. And they're petitioning after losing at the 10th Circuit, which rejected the preschool's argument. According to the 10th Circuit's opinion, Colorado's conditions for participating in the universal preschool program were neutral and generally applied to every preschool, regardless of religion. And those are actions that normally do not violate the Constitution. But St. Mary really wants to openly discriminate in its admissions and also get taxpayer money, right? They want both. And so it came to the Supreme Court last fall asking it to take up the case. Specifically, St. Mary asked the court to address 3 issues, and I'm going to try my best to summarize these and minimize the legalese, which is not always my strong suit. So first, they asked the court to resolve a circuit split, which is something that occurs when 2 or more courts of appeal, so like the 10th Circuit, reach conflicting rulings on the same point of law. And St. Mary's thinks that so now remember, this is all St. Mary's position right now. St. Mary's thinks that the 10th Circuit decision deepens a circuit split over what kinds of secular exemptions render a law not generally applicable under this case called Employment Division v. Smith. Now, that's a 1990 case, so potentially even before some of y'all were born here, but that's a case that held that the Free Exercise Clause of the U.S. Constitution, which is a part of the First Amendment, that's how we get to the fact that this is a First Amendment. They're making a First Amendment argument here, does not exempt religious observers from compliance with neutral, generally applicable laws. That is like laws that are applying to everyone and that don't target a specific religious group. The petitioners, so St. Mary, are especially focused on whether courts must evaluate all secular exemptions and discretionary carve-outs, or whether only unfettered discretion and exemptions for identical secular conduct count. So that was the first question, long question. Second, the preschool argues that the 10th Circuit has joined a growing number of courts misreading the 2022 case of Carson v. Macon as prohibiting only explicitly religious exclusions. And third, they asked the court to just overrule Smith, which is that case that I mentioned in the first question. Now we don't have to worry about that third question because the Supreme Court was like, no, I'm not even going to deal with that. So they're only looking at those first two questions. Okay. So that's what St. Mary is kind of asking the court to do, but that's also through St. Mary's framing. So what do the respondents say? How are they coming at this? Well, on the first question, Colorado's brief in opposition insists that there is no split here, right? We don't have to resolve some split because we're not even worried about what kinds of exemptions are okay. The 10th Circuit held as a threshold matter interpreting state law that Colorado's equal opportunity requirements allow no exceptions at all. The so-called secular exemptions, right, that the petitioners are pointing to are things like protections for kids with disabilities, or help for kids from low-income families. And so those are really targeted protections for those groups. They're not carve-outs from the equal opportunity or non-discrimination requirement. On the second question, Colorado maintains that the program does not exclude religious providers at all, right? Marty was just talking about that on this lead up to this case, right? The program welcomes them. It brought them in when they were talking about this program. It conditions participation only on compliance with the same neutral, generally applicable requirement imposed on every other provider. And also, fun fact, more than 40 faith-based providers, including 6 Catholic Charities preschools, have participated in Colorado's universal preschool program. And also, to note that this issue doesn't touch curriculum at all. Faith-based providers are free to teach what they want, right? We're talking about admissions here. So those are kind of the big legal questions before the court. And while they might seem kind of in the weeds to some people, we're really looking at why they're raising these legal questions and what's really at stake. And St. Mary doesn't hide the ball, right? They are clearly stating that they believe that Catholic teaching requires them to consider sexual orientation and gender identity of a student and their parents before admitting them to Catholic school, pointing to the fact that the Archdiocese does not recognize these relationships or being trans. So in their view, keeping these kids out keeps them aligned with Catholic teaching. But there are plenty of LGBTQ Catholic families. And even Pope Leo seems to still cling to some outdated views. But even his views, he did recently say that he believed that the church's teaching on social justice and equality and freedom were far more important. And we know that a big part of Catholic ministry and service towards those teaching is delivered through Catholic education. So why is St. Mary so bent on exclusion? And why do they feel entitled to exclude while receiving taxpayer money? I don't know. But these are the legal questions. And back to my colleague Nikhil, I don't know. I'm curious. What are your thoughts on how this decision will affect LGBTQ families moving forward?
Yeah, I think when we think about this, obviously, the most immediate concern is like, yeah, these families in Colorado, they're going to lose access to preschool. Like I mentioned before, this is a public benefit, but if you live in a place where your only options are, religious providers for preschool and they can deny you, um, then effectively your rights to those services are taken away. Like something you can't have a right to something if you can't actually cash that in anywhere. So basically, they would not get a public benefit that everyone in the state is entitled to, and that they're paying taxes to support. But the impact of this just it goes beyond this law. Like the court's decision could affect how courts evaluate other non-discrimination requirements in, you know, all sorts of public services. A lot of public services are administered through religious institutions. And they might use this to challenge, anti-discrimination protections in areas like healthcare or housing. So imagine an LGBTQ plus family who, is in a rural area, their child needs medical care, and the provider that they have that they can access under the public benefits is a religious provider. And they show up, and that provider might be able to deny access to that child, even if the law says otherwise. Um, and if the ruling allows for publicly funded providers to seek very broad exemptions from civil rights law. So where does that end? Because like, could they deny benefits to women, religious minorities? Like you mentioned before, there's quote unquote carve outs for people with disabilities or people who are low income. I really can't stress this enough, but there are so many Americans who rely on public benefits to feed their children and to keep a roof over their head. So potentially what's at stake here is whether families and vulnerable people in this country can rely on the service that are meant for them, or whether their access to everyday necessities is going to depend on who they are, where they live, and whether or not this person serving them thinks that they belong.
Nikhil, I think thank you for that. Sometimes I feel like, for people can sometimes feel like the law is something that's being done to them,
Yes.
right? And that it's hard to kind of get out from under it. I do want to say that sometimes, even though that happens, there's also opportunities in the law. There's the ability and the opportunities to do something.
Yeah.
And right now, even here in this moment where everything feels so daunting, I mean, not just this case, I mean, there's a lot going on, right? But everything feels so heavy. We do have opportunities to do something here, and I want to talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to turn it over to Anna, who can give us even more tips about how to do that. But as far as this case I want to be clear that this isn't nobody's sitting on their heels here, right? There are a lot of legal smarties that's a legal term. Legal smarties who are already doing work here, right? We've got Lambda Legal on the ACLU who've been working on this case. They filed joint briefs at the 10th Circuit. We've got additional firms working on doctrinal arguments, coming in, pulling in more and more of the perspectives of other folks. And, now is an opportunity for us, for advocacy organizations, and just for people who are affected to really round out these arguments by bringing them to life with real stories, right? I mean, Marty, when I was listening to you, I was just blown away and I was so impacted by everything you had to say. And so much of that is because those real stories touch real human hearts, right? That is where we find some incredible power. The direct lived experiences of LGBTQ families, or people with LGBTQ parents really illustrate that real world impact of a potential ruling. And, whether it's directly or indirectly or in the court of public opinion or at the Supreme Court, we want to use our voices and our stories to just both show the hopes and the potential harms here. Now, again, it's important to remember that being an LGBTQ family, being a kid with LGBTQ parents, and being Catholic or desiring a faith-based education, right? Those things are not antithetical. They're not necessarily opposites here. The way that St. Mary is kind of portraying it a little bit. There are LGBTQ Catholic families who desperately want their children to have a Catholic education, whether it's their faith or their culture or their families or sacramental preparation, right? There's all sorts of reasons why these families would want to use the taxpayer dollars that they've paid into the UPK program towards this education. And those families will be harmed if the court rules in St. Mary's favor. Not necessarily because it would mean that they can't attend St. Mary, right? I mean, I don't know who would want to go to school with a school that doesn't want you, right?
Yeah.
Like, so that's not necessarily the harm. They're not trying to like beat down the door to get in the school that doesn't want them. But because of those reasons that we came back to in the beginning, right? A ruling in St. Mary's favor sends a message about what types of kids and families are acceptable in faith-based schools and the types of kids and families that it is okay to exclude in taxpayer-funded programs. Children with LGBTQ parents and LGBTQ families would suffer a dignitary harm. They do suffer dignitary harms when they're singled out for exclusion and being told that their family is less than. And like Nikhil pointed out too, some families might face a material exclusion from the universal preschool program altogether if the school near them is Catholic and rejects them, or more people try to request this exclusion based on, this court's ruling. So, when providers face emboldened to have those similar exclusions. So these are the lived experiences that we want to share with the public and possibly even with the court. But this is where you come in, right?
Yeah. But you don't want to hear from us about storytelling. That's why we have an expert
Yes,
here on
Anna.
that subject. Um,
Yeah, and I've got a really important slide for you all that I think we need some visuals here. Okay.
Oh, Anna's coming in clutch with the deck.
So very complicated. We've got all the legal arguments. Here's the most important slide that you need to know, which is just share your story. As Meg said, it's really easy to feel helpless when you learn about headlines like this one. Neil, I just saw your comment in the chat, like what hope do we have to hold on to? What can one family really do to make a difference in these issues? But in this case, truly, like we're not pretending. Sharing your story is a concrete action that you can take that could shape the way that this all plays out. We are working on spotlighting the stories of LGBTQ plus families and allies for the general public, for the court. And if you need proof as to whether this has worked in the past, I'm going to go to the archives, which is what I'm good at. This does work. During the height of the fight for marriage equality, family equality, alongside COLAGE, put together a number of briefs to the court. We penned op-eds. We got out our metaphorical megaphone and we shared specifically the stories of families. Dozens of children with LGBTQ plus parents talked about how their experiences in a family that couldn't get married impacted their life growing up. Stories very similar to the one that Marty shared, actually. And that brief was mentioned by the Supreme Court justices. It was mentioned in oral arguments in the case that struck down the Defense of Marriage Act and in the decision to grant marriage equality nationwide. So we know that it has impact, it has power, and we are back at it again. But just like last time, we actually need stories. In order to tell stories, we need the stories, and that's where you all come in. So here's what we're looking for approximately. If the slide turns for me, there we go. We are looking for stories about both belonging and exclusion in religious and educational spaces. So that's LGBTQ plus families who have been turned away or discouraged or feared being turned away from a religious space, from an educational space, just because of who they are or what their family looks like. And then as also stories of times where you felt affirmed in a religious space. It's really powerful to demonstrate the positive impact of what could happen if you send your kid to a Catholic school. What was that positive experience for you? And we're looking for stories from LGBTQ plus parents, adults raised by LGBTQ plus parents, educators, members of the faith community, grandparents, allies. Basically, if you have a story to share, share it. The stories don't have to be recent. People's kids do not have to be school aged. So I think we probably all have a tale to tell in this area. And if everyone on this, there's 35 participants. So if every single one of you took 5 minutes to share your story with us, and I'll show you how to do that in a second, heck, we've got a brief. We're ready to go. We're ready to run. So I'll stop jabbering and I'll just tell you this is all you need to do. Scan the QR code. I'm going to talk for like an extra time just so you have time to pull out your phone and scan the QR code. It's going to take you to a form on our website. There we go. And it's just going to ask you a few very simple questions. If we use your story in any public facing materials, we're going to contact you. So don't worry, you sending this form doesn't mean suddenly your name is going to be splayed out everywhere. We'll reach out, we'll talk about what you're comfortable with, what details you'd like to be shared or not, and where you'd want those things to be shared. Nothing will be shared without your advanced notice. And if you're not a QR code person, my wife is not an old woman, but she cannot figure out QR codes. That's so okay. I'll be putting things in the chat, and then there will also be a follow-up email sent tomorrow with all the links that you need. But I think I've talked long enough that you've had plenty of time to pull out your camera phones. So I'm going to stop sharing and kick off the Q&A portion. So what questions do you all have for us? We have over 15 minutes, so really feel free to use this space however you need to. You can pop them in the chat. There's also a Q&A feature. They work pretty similarly, so don't worry too much if the chat is more comfortable for you. Neil did ask the first question, so I will present that one, and then as questions come in, please feel free to put them in the chat. From Neil says, it's good to hear that there are legal smarties in the game here with us. They're great to have on board and most welcome. Heck yes, they are. But let's recall that this case is going up to SCOTUS, the same SCOTUS that ruled 6-3, 5-ish to 4 on birthright citizenship. So will SCOTUS really listen to our stories and the validity of the case? I want some hope to hold on to. Hope is the theme.
Yeah, and I'll chime in really quick with a response to that because I responded to Neil in the chat. I can be a little bit of an eternal optimist. I also sometimes like to think of myself as a realist, even in my perpetual optimism. And I think it's really valid to say what's our chances here because we have had a lot of heartbreak from the court. It does feel like, oh, it's all coming down, and we knew exactly what day the BPJ decision was going to come down because they always do it on the last day of Pride Month, or at least in Pride Month, right? So we're
Right.
like, oh my God. And so and so I hear that feeling of frustration. And at the same time, there are a few things that signal some hope to me here. The fact, when Marty was asking, aren't they targeting Smith? Aren't they going after Smith, want to get rid of Smith? The fact that the Supreme Court had the opportunity to take up that question and opted not to, I think is one little nugget of hope that we can hold on to. I think also we do have some justices, and I'm specifically thinking about Justice Barrett, but I'm sure there are others as well who might understand or have some idea that there's some value to faith-based education. And seeing that as a critical mission. I also think that there's really some inconsistencies in what St. Mary is asking for and what they're saying here, particularly when other schools that are part of the same program, like the same diocese, are part of the UPK program and are fine with it, and their response to that is, oh well, they just have a slightly different mission than us. So this idea that it is such a strong tenet of their religion to participate in this exclusion when that is just not what's happening in other places, it feels a little, it makes their argument feel a little squishy and flawed. I think it's going to come down to how the court reads some of the doctrine, but the doctrine plus the stories, we want to see if we can bring in both.
All right, we have another question. If folks aren't comfortable sharing their story, what else could they do to be involved in or support this work?
Find somebody else who will tell their story. We really got to find the stories right now. This is a great partnership that we have with Collage and Family Equality, and they made these great flyers that we took to like a million different prides. I took some up to Gunnison this week, just trying to find stories, and so far we only have three. And so, we're having this today partially to generate some response to the need for having stories. So I'm not trying to be flippant with that answer, but that's really, really what we need. Adrian Shanker, who's in DC and works for us as a policy consultant, he's like, Marty, you have a real opportunity. The Supreme Court does look at local press in the states where these are coming out of. So the more you can do to make sure they're looking at Colorado doesn't want this ruling to allow churches to take public dollars for it for any reason, but specifically in this one for preschool, it matters. And so that's where we are in this phase right now. The other answer to that question is you can give money to any of these organizations or all, because we are paid employees trying to do this work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd also just like to point out, like, if you are uncomfortable, we absolutely can keep your story anonymous. And if you are on the fence, you can totally fill out this form and reach out to us because before we would use anything, we would get your permission first. And even if you just want to maybe chat with us or chat through whatever you're feeling, we're here to do that if need be.
Yeah, I think I want to add to that too. We would keep things anonymous to the extent that we can, but we can talk
Mhm.
to you about the bounds of anonymity in today's world during that call. But I think that too, yeah, if you want to call us, right? You're like, I don't want to type my story. Oh my gosh, just we'll figure it out. Call us. We'll
Mhm.
we'll make the
Yeah.
call happen. I saw another question too about do you have to be from Colorado? No. Give us your story, right? Because we how we use those stories might be slightly different depending on where they're from or what they look like. But I would love to have the problem of, oh my gosh, there's so many and we don't know what to use or how to use it. Then the flip of that saying, oh my gosh, we can't put anything forward because we just don't have it. So yes, please share your story, even if you're not from Colorado. Please share your story.
Similarly, does your story have to be really focused on like being barred from attending a Catholic school or the details of the case?
No, I mean, there's a lot of, lots of things. I mean, like I think Anna mentioned before, there's also the joy and benefits of what it means to participate in religious education or, you know, something like that. And also just like any stories of exclusion from public spaces, from schools and the harm that that cause, that helps us illustrate the harm and make it real.
Yeah, I think there's kind of different tiers or levels to how what the stories are and the
Yeah.
impact of the stories, right? Our unicorn story, right? We've got the unicorn story of, oh my gosh, this story definitely fits in with these facts so perfectly well. But that is not the only story that we need, nor will it be the only story that's persuasive to the court, right? The court knows the facts of this case. They already know what's going on, but they need to hear from the people
Yeah.
about what does it mean to be excluded? What does it mean to belong? We when we talk about marriage equality, some of the voices coming out for marriage equality, you heard Marty, even the normal, like, can my family be normal? And, regardless of what is normal or is not normal, this feeling of there is
I think
something
we're normal because we got divorced. I think that's how that works.
the feeling of there is something wrong with my family or there's something that others us in some way, and not only is there something that others us in some way, but it's so bad that the state gets to fund it is like it's very troubling. And I want the court and I want the people who are thinking about this case to think about what they're really saying here. What we're really, the ideas that we really are buying into with this type of framing.
So we have someone in the Q&As who says they're from a different state, but they happen to have a non-binary child. They're a preschool teacher who works with with a faith-based preschool because of their disability and special education services. Is that a helpful story to share? I feel like the answer is yes.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think the answer is that we
Yeah.
want the stories. And again, the answer is that when we have those conversations, I'm not necessarily specifically talking about this instance, but there might be times in which somebody calls and we're talking about a story and we're like, okay, that might be not necessarily be the story we need for this particular scenario. But now we know that there's this family who's experienced this particular situation. And, it might be really useful in some other contexts as well. Like I'm not talking about the specific things, but it gives us the opportunity to connect. It gives us the opportunity to talk a little bit about the work and about your role in the work. We talk about movement work. Movement work is the movement, right? Lawyers aren't the movement. The people in the paid roles aren't the movement. We're the movement, right? You are the movement. And so this is an opportunity to join, to lend your voice, and to really make a difference.
And to that end, there's an opportunity on the form to note if you want to be contacted just generally about storytelling in your state, related to very specific topics, even outside of this. If you have had experiences with fertility or with parentage or whatever it might be, we can get that info in, and then you'd get access to trainings, the media trainings, resources, and a bunch of other storytellers who have also agreed to be storytellers for our organization. So it's a great opportunity to hone those skills. If this is getting you jazzed and you're feeling like I am the movement, there are opportunities in this area and across the board. But we need your name in order to know that information and get it to you. There are okay, good. We got another question. Keep the questions coming. We've got 10 minutes. How do we know that other pre-K programs through religious-based organizations aren't discriminating? Is a question.
I mean, I'll take a first stab, but Nikhil, this might be a little more your wheelhouse. I think that the reality is oftentimes when we learn about schools or places discriminating because somebody has been discriminated against and shares that story, right? Or tells people about it. Here, the distinction here is that we've got two of the preschools saying we want to openly discriminate. And that not only do we want to openly discriminate, but we want to get taxpayer dollars while we do it. Now, I will tell you, so I am in the weeds with this case. I flew on my flight out to Chicago. I'm listening to podcasts, conservative podcasts talking about this case and how are they characterizing it and what are they saying. And it's so interesting to me because, right now they're saying, oh, the state wants to exclude Catholic schools. They want to kick Catholic schools out of the public preschool program, which couldn't be further from the truth. There was bent over backwards to try to include faith-based schools. They're just saying, where we draw the line? We draw the line at discrimination because this is supposed, like the whole point of the program was supposed to provide equal opportunity to Colorado's 4-year-olds, right? So there's a lot of mischaracterization in the news about how this is what's going on here as well, or how people are interpreting this case. I'm really glad that you all are here today to hear what it's really about and hopefully to lend your story to that as well. But the short answer is, are other preschools in Colorado discriminating? I don't know. There's a matching program. There's some preference lists that people can engage in with matching. All we know here is that the school is saying we want to, and we want to do it with taxpayer dollars.
Yeah. And that is a sea change. I mean, like worked in schools in compliance, and even when discrimination is clearly illegal. That does not stop it from happening. However, the danger of making it legal or even like a legal right for somebody to be able to discriminate is just a whole nother layer of bad. At least if we, found out that schools were discriminating when they weren't supposed to, we could sue them. We could try and get them to comply. But if it's yeah, brazen.
And to that end, just because I think people have varying levels of understanding of the courts and everything, we've talked a lot about Colorado, but the decision in this case is not limited to Colorado, right? Like, can you talk about the potential scope of a decision in this case?
Yeah, I mean, Meg, yeah, I'd be interested to hear your perspective too. I mean, there's a lot of different scopes this could have, but I think like you broke down so many like nuances with the Colorado UPK that I do wonder if that there is hope that that would sort of potentially limit something bad to other laws that are more similar to that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I will say, and to give to come back to Neil's comment about like where's the hope, is that even in some of the what we would characterize as the bad decisions
Yeah.
coming out of the Court, a lot of them have either been narrow in scope or in application or semi-overcomable like what Colorado got the Childs decision, right, the Childs v. Salazar decision out and immediately was like, okay, but we're going to create a civil cause of action, like we have our
Yeah.
roadmap now on what we want to do to give people some recourse here. And so to that end, I mean, I think that the case is specifically asking them to look at this in the context of this UPK program and the exemption that they're asking for. So we got to see what the court says and how narrow or broad they make their ruling. I do think that when the courts make bad rulings too, they embolden others to try to
Yeah.
engage in similar activity. So I think that that's a risk here, which is the point, right? That's the point of this case. It's the point goes beyond just what Saint Mary or Saint Bernadette wants to do. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's what the outcome will be. And so far, we're not at the Supreme Court yet. I know it's a different ballgame, but so far, everybody said no, 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 no. Like the 10th Circuit was just like absolutely not. So we'll see.
I think on that question, so I started Googling. I am not a lawyer. There is a Marty Moore in Boulder and who's a lawyer. That's not me. Um, but I started Googling because that the mixed delivery, I'm like, how unique is that? Because I had heard that Colorado, even with the religious section of the mixed delivery that we have, put a task force together of religious organizations and really tried hard to figure out how we include religion in this so every kid could succeed. And I've only found a handful or a couple of handfuls of states that have mixed delivery. And that's a Google machine. That wasn't like I'm a lawyer going through the files, but that doesn't mean it stops there, right? And I think it does have nationwide impact.
All right. Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions in, but I'm gonna talk for a little bit so you have time to type, and then if nothing comes in, then we'll move on with our day. Um, this is being recorded, so it will be shared on YouTube. We'll write up a little blog post as well, so that if listening and watching isn't your way of consuming information, you will have something written out as well. That might take a little bit of time, but the recording should be available tomorrow, as will the link that is in the chat. It will be sent out in a follow-up email to you all. And I am expecting, let's see how many people are here. We've got 28 people, so I am expecting 28 stories in my inbox by the end of the day. Let's go. I'm excited to read them all, and I am grateful for all of your time today. Seeing that there are no other questions coming in,
Or want to say one more
Meg
thing?
has something else to say.
Well,
Yeah,
I
go
just
for
want
it.
to say, 28 stories, sure, but I think we can do better than that because I know you all know people. And so, I do think this is a tell your friends moment. This is a
Yeah.
who is in my mental
Mhm.
Rolodex that may have something to say here moment. And this is also not letting perfect be the enemy of good. So even if you're like, I'm not quite sure, please reach out again and please tell others to reach out. Now is really the time to take action. I just can't stress that enough. We have an opportunity here, but the opportunity window is going to be closing on this, at least on this particular issue.
Yeah.
So please make the calls, send the emails, send the text, well, send the text or the voice memos, right? Let me not age myself by being like, oh, but please
Fire
reach
up the
out to
fax machine.
Okay. Okay, that's settled. Um, but pull out all the stops, really is what I'm saying. I think, you'll feel good knowing that what you've done all you can, and it really, really, really does make a difference.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else have anything they would like to share before we close out? Right. Well, in that case, it's my time to thank you for taking the time, for giving your expertise. This is really, really helpful. I think demystifying all the things that you read online is more important than ever. I hate that phrase, but it's true. It's more important than ever. So thank you. I know you are very busy people. And thanks to everyone for watching, for sharing your stories, for spreading the word. We got this. It's gonna be okay. We got this. But thank you all.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.